back to me, and I'd like to welcome you to our Stratton series. The Stratton series is a career center program that brings successful alumni back to campus to share their thoughts on career preparation and on their chosen field. Today, our guest is Pablo Navarro. A little bit about Pablo. He has held leadership positions at for-profit and nonprofit firms. He is currently Senior Director of Partnerships at Code 2040, a nonprofit that creates access, awareness, and opportunities for top Black and Latinx engineering talent and innovation economy. Prior to Code 2040, Pablo was VP of Business Operations at Sorcery Technology, a venture-backed startup in San Francisco. At Sorcery, Pablo built and ran the company's account management, operations, and sales teams. He also worked at Amazon, where he launched and ran several multi-million-dollar business units, including Amazon's flour business and its business-to-business food business. He also co-founded Amazon's Latinx affinity group, Latinos at Amazon. He holds a BA in mathematical economics from Carleton College, and an MBA from the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth. He speaks Spanish, English, Italian, and Portuguese. Please join me in welcoming Pablo Navarro.
Well, thank you all for coming. Free food aside, I'm hoping I can make this worth your time. I'm gonna get started, and I'm hoping technology will cooperate with me today. Great. So the topic of my presentation is save the world or make the big bucks, do I have to choose? And before I get started, I wanted to throw out a quick question to the audience. Is anybody here majoring or minoring in computer science or thinking about maybe majoring or minoring in computer science? Raise hands. Nobody? Okay, well then, shameless plug. Throughout this presentation, I will talk about trade-offs. The main trade-off that I will talk about is you can work at a nonprofit and have a really amazing, positive impact in the world. You'll also be eating ramen noodles and sharing a one-bedroom apartment with 3 more people. Or you can go to the private sector, have a little bit more financial freedom, pay your debt, but you might not get that positive impact. Here's my shameless plug. The US economy desperately needs software developers. If you are a software developer, this trade-off does not apply to you. You can go work at a nonprofit and become the highest paid person there and have an amazing impact, or you can work at a for-profit and make an obscene amount of money working on really cool challenges. So that was my shameless plug. Now back to us. If you're a fellow mortal who is not going to become a software developer, there will be a lot of choices that you'll have to make throughout your career. And I will talk about those in the context of my experience as a CC alum. During today's talk, I'll start with context. And context is really important because throughout your career, you will see countless alums coming back and giving you advice and sharing experience. As a CC alum, I want nothing but the very, very best for all of you. At the same time, any advice that I give you is colored by my experience and my biases and my points of view, which is why I think that understanding that context is important for every speaker. Then I'll talk about the dark path. That's my catchy way of saying, my time working in the for-profit sector. Then I'll talk about the switch, which is the switch to a nonprofit, the path of the light. That's when I talk about what it's like to work at a nonprofit. And then I will talk about other options and other paths and end up with Q&A. So first of all, context. This is me when I was at CC. I like to think of myself as an econ major with a soul. Here you can see all the activities and all the clubs that I was a part of. There you'll see some photos, some embarrassing, some not as embarrassing. I enjoyed having fun. I enjoyed watching, going to CC games and apparently taking ridiculous pictures. And all those things that a lot of CC students like to do. I was also involved with a gajillion things on campus, from every single student club available for econ majors to playing rugby and writing at the school publication called The Cipher. And one thing that I want to talk about here before I move forward is that I want to acknowledge that I had an incredible amount of privilege. Grew up in Colombia, went to a private school. I am a cisgendered male, straight. I'm Latino, but sometimes people will look at me and assume that I'm white. And these are very simple things, but there's different stereotypes that people used when talking to me. There's different opportunities and things that I perceive differently just by virtue of those things that were things that I was born with and were around me. And the reason that I want to highlight those privileges is because everybody has different privileges in their lives. And I see the world from my point of view and my experiences. If at any point in time I talk about something that seems natural or simple to me or straightforward, but may not apply to you, or you're thinking, hey, actually, this is totally not right based on where I'm coming from, please interrupt me and ask me questions. I want this talk to be as inclusive as possible for all of you. So that is me. You know, I like to think of myself as an econ major with a soul. I love numbers, I love economics, and then I went out to the real world, and this is where I start talking about the dark path. The first section is the Chicago journey. And when I talk about the path, you'll notice that I'll talk about superpowers, what I got, and what I did not get. Superpowers are those incredible things that I'm good at the time, and that were really valuable in the business sector. These are my superpowers. You probably have different superpowers. It might be that you're really good at qualitative research. It might be that you are incredibly creative and started your own company or started, you know, like your organization when you were at school. It could be that you have a wealth of connections that are very powerful and will help you throughout your career. Always think about the superpowers. One thing I want to clarify, you know, working hard and critical thinking, they're great. They're not superpowers, right? Like when I'm talking about superpowers are things that are going to blow people away, particularly in a job setting. So I'll get started. You can see my superpowers here. I love number. I was a mathematical econ major. I could go into Excel, play with pivot tables, do macros, and I love doing that, which is something that is relatively rare in this economy. Energy. I had boundless energy. I was doing a gajillion clubs. I always thought that sleep was optional. I would always get excited with challenges and when I was meeting new people. You know, there's a couple of my professors here, particularly in the econ department. They'll probably tell you that I never stopped nagging them. You know, Gretchen is here, who can probably tell you all the countless days and nights that I ended up at the Career Center being like, I need a job and a work visa. How do I get them? So that energy and that enthusiasm were also one of my superpowers coming out of CC. And the third one is the people. I say ish because I had a lot of great friends. I knew a lot of really cool people, but I realized that the further along that I went in my career, the more that I built those relationships and cultivated those friendships, that people component really developed from like a people-ish to like a really strong people skill. I'm going to talk about what I got from my experience. My first job at a college was working at a company called Ernst & Young. Ernst & Young is a big consulting company, offices all over the world. The office in Chicago was in the Sears Tower, which is the tallest building in the US, like really, really exciting place for me at the time to start my career. And there I got a lot of structure and guidance, like knowing how to work in a professional environment. Discipline, and this is something that was really hard, right? Like thinking that I had to plan 6 months ahead for a project, not 3.5 weeks ahead. You know, like knowing that I would come in and be sitting at the desk, same desk, doing the same things for anywhere between 8 to 14 hours every day. There wasn't going to be like constant switching, like that structure, that baseline was really important for me. Then I also got branding skills. And what I mean by brand is as you go throughout your career, people will look for indicators, right? Like they'll see that you worked at Ernst & Young, they'll say, oh, you have some structure, you're probably good with numbers. They'll see that you, same way, they'll see that if you went to CC, you're probably really good at critical thinking, and you have an internal idealist, and you're probably going to get really excited when you see a hockey game. But like that brand coming out of college was huge for me. Because even though Colorado College is very well known within the liberal arts circle, you go to Chicago, people have no idea what Colorado College is. They know what Northwestern is, what University of Chicago is, what University of Michigan is, and what the local state schools are. And that's it. And a lot of times they're going to go with people that have those brand names because it's what they know and they're familiar with the quality. So that's a little bit of structure and guidance. Brand, obviously skills. I liked numbers. I had a good base, and I was able to expand that by a lot. I learned project management. I was writing 100-plus page technical reports that went out to the government and financial institutions. Like, those were skills that were very valuable in the workplace. I also got exposure and some money. Like, it was definitely enough to pay my bills and help out my family back in Colombia. And I got some exposure, right, to like my managers, my senior managers, and some of the people in the industry. But I did not get to experience the world. It's not like I was out in the Amazon jungle playing with spider monkeys. I was living in Chicago, right? I did not get that from my job. I did not get an emotional boot camp. And what I mean by this, I'll talk more about this when I talk about the nonprofit sector, but a lot of times you're in a company, you're more than welcome to have as many emotions as you want, but people don't care. They care about you hitting your goals and you getting your work done. So a lot of that interpersonal, emotional intelligence work, you might get some of it in the for-profit sector, but you're going to get a lot more of it in the nonprofit sector. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. Positive impact. There's no positive impact. I'm helping companies write international tax reports. Yes, sure, I'm helping a company in some way, but I'm not really helping the world. Not really a lot of room for creativity, and also not as much people and exposure. And what I want to say here is, I have a bunch of logos out here. And these are, right, because I did not get these things from my day-to-day job. I had to go outside of my day-to-day job to get those things. I wanted to experience the world. I was fortunate enough that, at the time I was dating somebody that worked in an airline, and my sister worked for a Colombian airline, so that's how I got to travel the world and see much of it, but it was, on my own money and on my own time. The emotional boot camp, I didn't get, and I didn't get that until I joined a nonprofit. The positive impact, I joined ALPFA, which is the largest Latino professional organization in Chicago, and I did a lot of volunteering, but that had to be out of my own time. So this was nights and weekends when I was not working. Creativity, there's Dashbot, which is a startup in Chicago. I started helping them on the side. And then I worked at Sandbox Industries, which is a venture capital fund in Chicago. But all of these were things that I had to seek outside of my day-to-day job. And the same thing, people and exposure, I gained some of that through that. And again, Giancarlo, one of my best friends, I'm honored to have his father here. He was one of my best friends, and he ended up moving to Chicago. And it was really hard when I moved to Chicago because not a lot of CC students were there. And I went from being surrounded by 2,000 amazing, open-minded, smart, idealistic people to living in a huge city where every other person went to a Big Ten state school. And I didn't have a lot to talk about. So I had to work really hard, right? Like Giancarlo, I had a friend from back home, and like every single person that I met, I was like, oh, great, I like you. Let's be friends. And introduce me to all your friends because I knew more people. So that is Chicago. That is the Chicago part of the journey. Now, the world is calling, right? I had been in my job for 2 to 3 years. This is good, this is great. I've seen Chicago, I've seen the wonderful world of transfer pricing and international tax law. I want to see more, right? And this is when I decided to apply to business school. You can see a picture. I'm over there, very small, and I'm wearing a CC shirt, which you might not be able to see, and I'm standing in front of the Tuck Business School. Places is when I went to Tuck, and after Tuck I went to Amazon, and then I worked at a startup. Right, so where am I at that point in my career? 2 or 3 years out of college, working at a big consulting company. My superpowers change. I have a solid foundation, right? I can say I'm really good at project management, at numbers, at business analytics. And I have a stronger brand. I have the Ernst & Young brand. I have a unique background, right? I'm Latino, but I lived in the US and I speak all these languages, and I worked at startups and at venture capital funds, and I was the youngest board member on Alpha, which is the largest Latino organization. Those were my superpowers. And then people, this was a little bit stronger now. And one of my best friends from Colorado College, his brother had gone to Tufts Business School at Dartmouth. And when I was applying to business school, I picked up the phone, called him, got great advice, really, really, really blunt, direct feedback that I needed on my application. And he even emailed the director of admissions saying like, hey, I know him on a personal level, like I would recommend Pablo to Tuck. So that people component was really powerful. And again, right, like part of it was because of that deep Colorado College friendship, which had been cultivated over the years. What I got out of business school, out of Amazon, out of Sorcery, I got a lot of exposure, and I got to meet amazing people. You know, if you find that if you go to grad school, if you go to the right place, you can get an atmosphere that's similar to CC, which was the case at Tuck. But now you're dealing with people who really, 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 really care about what you're studying. And to me, that was amazing, right? Like being surrounded by people who every day I was absolutely humbled at. You know, the things that I thought I was good at, I was like, oh great, I'm great at economics and I'm great at math. And nope, here come a bunch of people that are a lot smarter than me on those things, but are also really friendly. And you know what? I have these other skills that I can pull out that can really complement theirs. Again, the brand and skills, similar. Tuck Business School is a brand name. Amazon is a brand name. People see those on your resume. They open doors. Ideally, the world wouldn't operate that way, but it does. And that was really big. Like when I was applying to jobs, you know, after Amazon, like I remember sitting with the CEO of Sorcery, that was a startup that I worked with, and she was like, listen, I'm gonna be honest with you, the main reason you're sitting here talking to me is because you worked at Amazon. And because what you learned there is really valuable, and I want that mindset at my company. So that brand is really important. And in ideal world, it shouldn't be, but it is. And it's something that you need to consider as you launch your career. Again, knowledge and money. You know, like not that I was, you know, like float, you know, like swimming in rivers of money, but you know, Amazon does pay a lot more than Ernst & Young. And that was good to pay my debts, particularly because I took a huge step to go to business school. But also gained a lot of knowledge, like deeper knowledge on business, on economics, on international finance, on startups, on technology that was really valuable. And the final thing is mastery and management. And what I mean by mastery is that by this point, the things that were my superpowers when I was graduating CC, after Ernst & Young, Amazon, you know, working at Sorcery, going to Tuck, those things, I had mastering in those things, right? Like the things that I can do with numbers and business analytics are really, really, really powerful now because it was a superpower that I had been developing through multiple places. The other thing is management. You know, by this point, I had managed teams, I had built teams, I had managed people. That's really, really, really hard and really rewarding. And when you learn how to do those things, you become very valuable at whatever organization you decide to join. What I did not get, again, no emotional boot camp, no positive impact, no sleep, definitely no sleep. Like going to business school, working at Amazon, working at a startup, sleep becomes this thing that you used to do. You're just working. And after a while, you start to burn out. Like literally start to burn out, and you have to be careful with this. The other thing was a balance. I didn't really have a balance, right? Like I worked directly with the CEO of the startup, and her idea of work-life balance was to take every other Saturday off. So other than that, I was working Sunday through Friday. So you know, like it takes a toll on you eventually. Again, there were things in which I got the positive impact. I started the Latinos at Amazon, which is the Latino professional group at Amazon. Sleep I didn't really get until I joined a nonprofit, you know, every now and then on vacations or on the weekends, but so far. So that is the dark path, the world is calling. And now I'm going to talk about the switch, right? And if you start your career in the private sector, at some point, you know, that CC flame in you is going to be like, hey, help the world, help the world, help the world full time. The people need you. You know, the environment needs you, whatever it is. And this is when I made the switch. And there's no right time to make that switch. For me, I felt that it was the right time. Kind of. Probably not 100% right time, but then again, you know, nothing is perfect. Why did I think it was the right time? Because I was in a stable place, right? Like, I had lived in Chicago, I had gone to business school, I had lived in New England, in Colorado, in Seattle. I was like, well, you know, I'm okay staying in San Francisco for a little bit. Like, I'm in a stable place in my life, emotionally, from a professional standpoint. I had a financial base. I still have a humongous debt from graduate school that I don't want to think about, you know, but because I had gained mastery, because I had that experience managing people, because I had those brands, I was able to go into a nonprofit at a position where, you know, like I'm still making a lot less than my peers from business school that are working in the private sector, but it's significantly more to the point where I can support myself in a city like San Francisco that is insanely expensive. And the other thing is the people, right? Like, you know, many of you will have people that are important in your life, you know, whether it's friends, loved ones, family. And I had a very, very, very strong support network. And people that, you know, like when the time came when I was like, hey, I have all this debt, I could stay at the startup and cash out on the equity. I could go work for a big tech company and make, you know, twice what I'm making right now at the startup. Or I could go work at this nonprofit and make about the same and be paying this debt for the next 10 years. You know, people ask me, you know, what do you really want to do? Forget about the money, forget about everything else. What do you really want to do? And supporting me with that. And that is one of the things that, you know, without that support in my life, you know, like I might have joined the nonprofit. I might have just taken the better paying job and try to pay out my student loans at some point. The other thing, in addition to the right time, it was the right opportunity. Again, kind of, right? Like the cost that I really care about, right? Supporting. So right now I work at Code 2040. And we provide access, awareness, and opportunities for Blacks and Latinxs. And Latinxs is the, you know, fancy way of saying Latinos and Latinas, and anybody in between who doesn't identify with the two main gender roles. You know, like it was a cause that I really cared about. The spirit of the company was one that I cared about. Like, yes, it was a nonprofit, and the people on the board were really amazing, talented entrepreneurs, you know, venture capitalists, people with a lot of experience, nonprofit and for-profit. So it was very much, it wasn't your traditional nonprofit, right? Like it wasn't like I was, you know, I could probably not function in a very hierarchical environment. Like these were people that came in and they were like, hey, we want a business model. We want to make money. We want to leverage the tech industry. We want to operate this company like a startup. And I was like, great. I love startups. I've been in the tech industry. You know, I have the skill set to make money, and I'm pretty decent at it. So match the spirit, and then match the industry and the skill set. I was in the tech industry. I had already run a sales team. I had already run an account management team. I had already done a lot of the business analytics in my previous company. I worked, you know, very closely with my CEO in building our financial models and setting up the strategy and saying, great. You know, like sales is not only about how many people you pitch, like there is an analysis and you have to see like all the numbers behind it. So it matched my industry and my skill set. And that's how I made the switch. Now I'm going to talk about the path of the lights. And again, these are the superpowers that I had going in, mastery of the dark arts in business. You know, by that point, like business school, startup, running businesses at Amazon, like, yeah, I was pretty solid on the business side. And then the analytics and the experience. Like I can run Excel pivot tables in my sleep. And I love doing that. I love doing that, which is weird. But, you know, we all have the things that were weird. And, you know, like the experience. Like I had already built a team. I had managed a team. I had hired people. I had laid off people. You know, like whatever you want to put in front of me, it won't freak me out. Like I've seen it before and I've been through it. And the people, like really, really amazing, powerful relationships People that were really driven, people that really cared about me, and people that believed in me. You know, to this day, the CEO of the startup that I worked with said, hey, like, I want to work with you with the next company that I run. Like, I want to work with you again. And those relationships, like, are going to be really, really important as you develop your career. You know, and what I'm getting at a nonprofit, emotional boot camp. Like, seriously, you know, we had a retreat and we spent, out of the 4 days that we spent in Washington, D.C., 2 of them were talking about feelings and how we handle with the emotional stress. How do we handle the emotional stress of our work? And the emotional stress that you will face working at a nonprofit, it's at a completely different level than the emotional stress that you'll face at a for-profit sector, particularly if you're dealing with issues around social justice. Like, I have to deal with people telling me, you know what, you're discriminating against me because of my skin color or because of my background. Or people saying, hey, you know what, you know, I really want to hire more Black and Latin people, but I don't want to lower the bar. And I feel that I have to lower the bar in order for people to come in. And you have to very gently and calmly explain that the bar, it's a subjective notion, right? Like, whether or not you went to a great school, yes, it's good, but there's people that didn't go to an Ivy League school and are going to be able to contribute a lot more and are going to be able to code software a lot better than the people that went to an Ivy League school. Like, it just is. And at the end of the day, you need people to do the job. You don't need people to become the CEOs of the company. So, like, you have to deal with a lot of that. So I definitely got that emotional boot camp. You know, like, positive impact, I put it there squared, right? Like, it's not only that I'm getting to have a positive impact on the nights and weekends, I'm doing that day in and day out. And sometimes I'm deep in the weeds, you know, like I'm negotiating a contract or I'm having a tough conversation with somebody in my team or an external partner and I forget it. But every now and then I get to talk to brilliant Black and Latinx software developers that tell us, hey, you know what, like, I was coming out of college, like at University of Puerto Rico, and no company wanted to hire me. And all of a sudden, I applied to this fellowship, and, you know, like, during the summer, I made more money than my entire family together, right? Like, my grandmother has a serious disease, and I'm paying for her treatment, and supporting myself, and launching my career. And, you know, I still get to have fun and go out with friends. Like, that to me is really, really powerful, that positive impact. That keeps you going, the balance. Unheard of. We closed the office for 2 weeks during December, and you're not allowed to come in. Like, the office is locked. That never happened. Like, I was on my cell phone on Thanksgiving when I was working at Amazon, right? Like, for-profit sector, you know, get that balance. You know, here, there's a really good work-life balance because people do care about self-care, and they make it a priority. It's not the case in every nonprofit, but it's more likely than you will find that in a nonprofit than in a for-profit company. And again, the exposure. Like, this is, again, like, it's a privilege. It's something that I'm very fortunate. Like, my job is to mingle with executives and hiring managers at the most innovative tech companies in Silicon Valley who want to hire more people that look like me. Like, that's great. I can't really complain about that. What I'm not getting, and this is important, because regardless of where you are in your career, there's always going to be a trade-off, right? Like, the faster pace and the impact. It is fast-paced, but man, when I was working at Amazon, like, in a year, I took a business from, you know, $500,000 a year to $5 million a year. And I could see day in and day out, great, I negotiated this contract, our prices went down, boom, here's the impact on profitability. I changed the prices, boom, here's the impact on what we're selling. Hey, we want to change something, I tell my team, I tell the people, and we're on it. And that's a faster pace. When you're working at a mission-driven organization, things do not work that way. People are there because of the mission, not because of the paycheck. So you have to constantly sell and convince people, like, hey, we're going to make this change. This is why it's important. They might be like, you know what, that's not aligned with what I believe in, and I believe that we could be helping the students in this other way. You're like, great, this was a for-profit. I could say, you know what, you do that or you don't get your bonus. but you have to negotiate, and there is a virtue to that. But the trade-off is that you won't get that fast-paced and that impact. The perks. I'm not gonna lie, I love working at a nonprofit, but I really, really, really wish I could pay my student debt in less than 15 years. And like the lightheartedness of the dark side, and this phrase might seem a little bit awkward at first glance, but it's the fact that you're working in a for-profit company. Sure, like you're stressed, you missed your goal, and your manager is gonna make a big deal out of it, but the world is not gonna fall. Whereas as you're working at a nonprofit is you don't do something, you're not contributing to the mission, or you're always having intense conversations about social justice day in and day out. And there are days where like I missed arguing about what the price should be on a product and what the ROI of that would be, and not necessarily talking about why don't we change this? Oh, what's the impact on the mission? What are you saying about Black and Latinx talent? What are you telling to our partner companies? Like like the more deep emotional conversations that you're in and day out, working at a nonprofit. So now that I talked about that, the path of the light, I want to talk about the other paths. I talked about my experience because that's the experience that I lived. There are other ways in which you can structure your career, right? There's the recovering idealist that is basically, like started a nonprofit, whether it's Teach for America or some other organization that you really care about. You're going to be eating ramen noodles. You are going to be making way less than all your classmates. And unless you're living in a place like Colorado Springs, or in other words, if you live in New York or you live in San Francisco, you're going to be sharing a 1-bedroom with 3 people, like period. And you have to be okay with that because you care about the impact that much. And you're probably not going to do a whole lot to your student debt. It's going to be there, right? Travel the world, like do something amazing, right? Like do the Peace Corps, do something that really fulfills you. And then eventually switch, to the dark side, right? You can do this generally by getting an MBA or an MPP, especially if you're international. If you're not, you're from the US, you might be able to do this switch straight up. Just go from an organization like TFA that has a very strong brand and apply to a job at Google. I know that a lot of people that ended up doing that. And bring some light to the dark side. Like you're going to bring a skill set that the other people that are in the for-profit world don't have. You can be an idealist till the end, just never do the switch, and you'll eventually go from living with 3 people to living with 1 more person in a 1-bedroom. Either that, or you have somebody else that will pay for everything else that you need to pay for in the world. But again, like that is a trade-off. Like if you really care about the passion and the mission, and you're able to sacrifice some things in lifestyle, you can do this. And the dark night. Hey, maybe the light side is not for you. You hate emotional conversations, but you love numbers. Like you can still do really well, make a lot of money, and then have those contributions on the side, and make no mistakes. You can have a great impact. Like you can, look at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Like you can have a lot of impact just by having the financial resources and expertise. And the best of both worlds. And I apologize for the language. You can find a really awesome social impact org that pays livable wages and is amazing enough to get, and you're amazing enough to get in. And there are some organizations like this, right? Like there's, the Bridgespan Group, which is a consulting firm that works with nonprofits. You'll be making a lot less than the people who go to Bain & Company or McKinsey or another one of the big consulting firms, but you'll still make a decent amount, right? Code 2040, this is one thing that I'm super proud of the organization that I work with, is that you're not going to make the same as you would at Google, but you still make enough where you can support yourself somewhere in the Bay Area. You might be living out in the East Bay, or you might still be sharing a 1-bedroom apartment with 2 more people, but it's livable, right? Or you become a software developer, and you don't have to worry about this. You just get paid a lot to work at a nonprofit, or you get paid a ton, and over $100,000 a year to work at a for-profit company, and then you can do whatever you want with that money on your side. So those are the other paths. I also wanted to offer some additional tips, and I'm not going to go through this, but you can see this, find a role that is going to give you a lot of opportunity in a very short period of time. Learn to code. Even if you don't want to become a software developer, just learn it. It's going to make your life a lot easier, and you're going to be able to apply to a lot more jobs. Practice humility and own your privilege. We all have privilege. Like, we are at an elite, private, liberal arts institution. That in and of itself is a privilege. We all have our own privileges. You don't need to be ashamed of them. You don't need to apologize for them, but own them. Realize that those privileges will play a role in what you accomplish. All things equal, go for the better brand name. Don't be afraid to jump around, but just make sure that you don't burn bridges when you do. Develop your, get your stuff done attitude. Now, right, like, people will remember, like, you're always building your personal brand. Always. Always. Every time you get to a meeting early, that you're prepared, that you make a smart comment at class, you're building your brand. And I cannot stress this enough. When I was applying to Sorcery, they were doing a back channel background check. So they basically found out somebody, most companies won't do this, but it can happen, right? Like, they found one of my classmates at Colorado College who didn't happen to be a friend of mine, just somebody that obviously knew me. And they asked her, hey, what do you know about Pablo? And she was like, well, I wasn't really close friends with him, but I know that he was really outgoing and he worked really hard in all of his classes. And that's great, right? If I would have been mean to that person, or I would have shown up hungover, half asleep in one of the class, she might have said that, and I might have not gotten the job. So always, 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 you're building your brand everywhere. Start thinking about your careers. Now you can change paths, but at least have one. Right? And this is very important. Like, when you're applying for jobs, you're not competing against your fellow CC students. You're competing against the people that go to Ivy League schools and the people that go to big state schools. And this is one thing that I want to stress. Like, yeah, I think the average CC student is probably smarter than the average CU Boulder student. But the really, really, really smart CU Boulder students have taken a gajillion classes and have done 5 internships by the time they graduate. And it's going to be really, really, really tough to compete with them if you're coming in saying, I have critical thinking skills, and I was skiing over the winter break. And they're like, I started a company and I have 25 classes in managerial accounting. The job is going to go to the latter. So make sure that you get your internships and your experience. And again, shameless plug, just learn to code, please. Just a little bit. And with that, can open it up to questions. I am a CC student, sorry, I couldn't help it. DU Siebel. Any questions?
I'll just comment. As an older person, relatively speaking to the other people in the room, I really appreciated your comment about all things being equal, pick the better plan. I only spent 5 years in the profit sector right out of college, and then found my way to the lighter side, and that is higher education. So I was lucky enough to find my way to Wellesley College, which is a niche institution, and then I found my way to another niche institution, and then another niche institution, and then here, which is also a niche institution. So if I look at the pedigree, if you will, of a resume like that, I think it speaks well to your decision making, that you care about the brand, and you probably did develop some really fine skills at each of those places. So I think that's good advice for really everybody here, to be picky, but to be on a path.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, right, like, I felt totally fine going to a startup in Silicon Valley, and I felt totally fine going to a small nonprofit, because I know that regardless, I have that Tuck MBA on my resume, and I have Ernst & Young, and I have Amazon, and tomorrow I could decide, you know what, nonprofit world is not for me. When I apply to a job, people are going to see, oh, this person worked at Amazon. and they're going to make assumptions. Whether those assumptions are right or not, or they should even make those assumptions, people are going to make those assumptions. So having those brands earlier on in your career are going to give you a lot of freedom. If you don't get them early on in your career, you're going to be stuck with an amazing experience at a company that most people won't learn about. And then you're stuck trying to explain your experience versus the person that, great, tried and true, worked at Google or went to Yale or worked at McKinsey or Deloitte or Goldman Sachs or Teach for America or whatever it is.
What was your experience, or did you ever consider going to some kind of corporate responsibility or working for one of these big tech startups doing their sort of nonprofit side?
It's a great question. Personally, I did not. I know some people that do it and are get really excited about it. For me, it wasn't the right path because it's really, really, really hard to get into one of these. Unless you're one of the, like the recovering idealist path, right? You have a nonprofit background and then you did your MBA, like you'd be straight, like you probably have a decent chance of getting in. So to me, like it wasn't really an option. And it's also for me that, like I'm very specific, right? Like I care about supporting other people that, I'm Latino and I identify with other Latinos and I want to help them because I know that a lot of them might have not had the same opportunities that I did, but are equally, if not smarter or harder working. So I want to contribute to them. So it wasn't something that I considered, if I would have gotten like an email from Google being like, hey, we have this position open and, like our Google for entrepreneurs focus on the Hispanic market. Do you want to apply? I would have been like, sure, definitely. But it just wasn't really on my radar. What?
Like, do you think Google is expanding that sort of stuff, or is it mostly happening with smaller, like, nonprofits that are feeding off of the tech?
So are you talking about corporate responsibility broadly or inclusion?
Like with a company like Google?
Yeah, I mean, like Google has google.org, Salesforce has salesforce.org. Amazon doesn't believe in that. Most of the other companies have like big corporate responsibility departments. It is, however, really, 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 really hard to get in. So like that would be one of those, the best of both worlds. If you're an absolute rock star and make sure that you do your internships like sophomore and junior year, junior and senior year, like really good, prestigious brand name internships. And you might have a connection, like you might have a shot. And that would be like, if you have that kind of opportunity, go for it. Don't think about it, go for it. That's one of the best of both worlds. The caveat is that it's incredibly difficult to get in. Yes, Mark? Or Nancy?
I had a question. Just my first big job out of college was a computer programmer. What kind of software is the software to be in?
Yeah, so I mean, you generally want to think about languages. So like Ruby on Rails or Python. Different companies use different programming languages, so it really depends which company you want to work with. And a lot of times, the companies care a lot more. Like they're more excited to see that you've developed a program than to know that you've taken X number of classes. Like yes, they want to see that computer science degree, and companies want to see that computer science degree for a lot of roles that are not software development. Like if you want to be a technical product manager, if you want to do marketing or sales at a company that sells technology, like they'll go with a candidate that has a computer science degree. Which is why, like, if you can get a minor in computer science, even if you do not want to become a software developer, it can help you in your career. But to answer your questions, like the languages, Ruby on Rails, Python are some of the popular ones. Some of the older ones like C++, if you're going to work for the government, they'll be useful, but most tech companies won't use them that much.
Up until until about the mid-1990s. So you're giving advice to the economics department now as a former econ major. We had a requirement for a computer science course, and we eliminated that requirement. Do you think we should add that requirement back? And I know how to program in Fortran. It hasn't been all that useful. You all handled my dissertation.
Yeah. So the answer is yes, with multiple exclamation marks following that. Like, I cannot oversell this. Like, by 2020, 70% of technical jobs in the US are going to go unfilled because there's not enough people with the technical skills to do them. That is huge. And starting salary for a computer software developer is going to be internships. Just the internship. You get paid like $7,000 to $8,000 a month for your internship, plus a housing stipend that can be another $3,000 or $7,000. Like, right out of college, you're going to be making more than $100,000 if you're working at one of the big tech companies. If you're going to work at a startup, you're going to be making anywhere between 80 or 90K a year. Like, and even if you don't get one of the best jobs, one of the not so good jobs are probably going to be like 60 to 70K in Denver or some other city where you're going to be living a lot better than your friends in Silicon Valley that are making more than that. So yes, like having that foundation, incredibly useful. Any other questions? Anything you're curious to learn about, even if it wasn't about the presentation, about life after CC, nonprofits? Sure.
What did you do during your summers at CC?
It's a great question. My first summer, I went back to visit my folks. And then my summer between my sophomore year and junior year, I did State of the Rockies. Are you all familiar with State of the Rockies research project? I did that, and it was really, really helpful. It's a paid internship. For me as an international, it's one of the few internships that I can actually do because I'm working for my university, so I don't have to worry about like any constraints on my work visa. And yeah, I did that. It was amazing. I did that my junior year, and then between sophomore and junior year. Then funny story, funny in retrospect, right? Between my junior and senior year, I went to Brazil to do an internship with IPEA, which is the biggest Brazilian think tank. It's like sponsored by the government. It's the economic organization. I got there, it was a mess. Like, my paperwork was wrong. Like, they didn't let me get into Brazil. I had to fly to Argentina to get a visa. I was freaking out. Once I got to Brazil, I realized that the apartment I had booked on Craigslist was in a generally okay part of the city, but it was next to a housing project that had been on the news for drug trafficking, prostitution, and murder. So, when my boss was dropping me off, he said, oh, you might see some drug dealing and prostitution, but you tell them you're Colombian and they won't mess with you. And I was like, no, I am not staying here, and I'm finding another place. So I lost my deposit, had to scramble to find a place in Brazil. It was the Olympics were in Rio that year, so like the prices were over the roof. Like I was able to get a place in a little bit less sketchy part of the city, not entirely less sketchy. Like one day I was coming back from work pretty late and I got held at knife point. And like I didn't lose anything, nothing happened to me, but I remember walking into like a video thingy. And this is where the privilege of Colorado College comes from. I emailed Walt Hecox, who was the professor that led the State of the Rockies, and I was like, Walt, this has happened to me. I just want to go back home. Is there any way you have a position open in the State of the Rockies? And he was like, you know what? Every year I like to get an econ student, because State of the Rockies, you have to be an environmental science major. I generally try to get an econ student to do like all the numbers. I actually haven't found anybody this year. Let me see, like come back home, and I don't have the budget, but I'll figure out how I can make it work. And you can be home. And I think I cried when I read that email. Like, I've never been so happy. But my point was, like, I did have those internships, right? If I could go back in time, I would have probably applied to like JP Morgan, like big, banks, consulting companies, like tech companies, like anything that could get me like real world experience, ideally with a brand. Because doing that, like whether you want to go into nonprofit or for profit, like it's going to help you, it's going to make a world of difference.
Just a follow-up question, even if that brand is like very different from like what you want to go into?
It's a great question. So one of the best things that you can do when you think about your career, think about functions. Don't think about industry, think about functions, right? Let's say that you're really excited about the sports apparel industry or extreme sports, right? It's an industry that is really hard to get into. But then think about function, right? Let's say that you're pretty decent with numbers and you're good at finance. You get an internship at Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan, and it's going to be a lot easier for you. Like, right? You might not want to work there full time, but you gain that functional expertise in finance. And if you were to apply to a finance job at Patagonia or North Face or Columbia to their finance department, they're going to look at your resume and say, oh, this person is passionate about what we do, and they worked at Goldman Sachs, so they must know their finance pretty well, right? So by developing that functional expertise, you might be able to leverage that. Same thing, if you like advertising, you work at a top advertising agency, and you can then take that functional skill set and apply it to a different industry. Does that answer your question? And sometimes having a big brand just helps, even if you're doing something completely different, because people will see that and say, oh, this person is smart and can do a job right.
Well, thank you, Pablo.
Thank you, Michael.
Just wanted to do a couple announcements. Pablo is also going to be around this afternoon, too.
you, sir.
He's going to be doing a session from 2 to 3, specifically on international students and finding jobs after they graduate in that situation. But then also we have some one-on-one spots, too. So if you'd like a half an hour to pick his brain specifically on your situation, we do have a few spots available this afternoon by appointment, and that's with Gretchen if you want to talk with her. And we also have 1 or 2 spots too available for our dinner tonight in Pablo's honor. So if you're interested in coming over to that house and having some great food, you can also see Gretchen about that. But yeah, thank you for coming, Pablo.